Welcome back to Literary Fervour. In our previous lecture, we met Chaucer's unforgettable pilgrims and explored how the general prologue serves as a remarkable portrait of 14th century English society. And now it's time to hear the stories these pilgrims tell. Each tale reflects the personality, profession, beliefs, and values of its narrator. Some are romantic and idealistic, others humorous and satirical. Some teach moral lessons, while others expose the weaknesses of human nature. So, together, these tales showcase Chaucer's extraordinary versatility as a storyteller and the deep understanding of society. So, in today's lecture, we'll discuss the major tales of the Canterbury Tales, which are very important from exam point of view. So, let's begin our exploration with the first and the noblest story in the collection, the Knight's Tale. Let's begin with it. One of the greatest achievements of the Canterbury Tales is the astonishing diversity. Chaucer does not confine himself to a single literary genre. Instead, he brings together nearly every important narrative form which was known to the medieval Europe. The collection includes romances, fabliaux, then the beast fables, also sermons are there, saints legends are there, then exemplum is there, Breton lay format is there, which combines romance with supernatural elements. And then moral tales are also represented there, which explore the ethical and philosophical question. So, this sort of variety mirrors the diversity of the pilgrims. And each pilgrim tells this kind of story that reflects his or her personality or the education, profession, also their social position. So the tales are not randomly arranged, they are carefully matched to their narrators. The Chaucer also balances seriousness with humor. Noble romances are followed by comic stories, moral reflections by lively satire. So, this constant variation maintains readers' interests while presenting a comprehensive picture of medieval literary culture. So, through this remarkable range of genres, Chaucer demonstrates not only his literary versatility, but also his deep understanding of human experience, love, greed, honor, deception, faith, justice, and folly. So they all find expression through different storytelling tradition. So let's start with the Knight's Tale. Now, the Knight's Tale is the first story narrated after the general prologue. It follows the general prologue, and it is appropriately told by the knight himself. It is a noble romance based on Tessida, though Chaucer significantly reshapes the original material. Now, story centers on Palamon and Archite. So, there are two Theban knights who captured during a war and imprisoned by Theseus, was the Duke of Athens. When confined, both knights see the beautiful Emily in a garden below and immediately fall in love with her. Their friendship gives way to rivalry as each believes he has a stronger claim to her affection. Now, after a series of adventures, the dispute is resolved through a grand tournament organized by Theseus. And Archite wins the contest, but suffers a fatal accident soon afterwards. Before his death, he asks Emily to marry Palamon, who eventually becomes her husband. Now, the tale explores the relationship between love, fortune, human free will, and divine providence. And Chaucer suggests that although individuals strive to shape their destinies, ultimate authority rests with a higher cosmic order. Unlike later comic tales, the Knight's Tale presents an elevated world governed by the ideals of courage, honor, and courtesy. Its dignified style perfectly reflects the noble character of the knight. The tale also introduces an important philosophical idea. Human beings often cannot understand the reason behind suffering, but divine providence ultimately establishes harmony and justice. So that was the knight's tale. Next, we quickly move on to the miller's tale. Now, if the knight's tale represents the highest ideals of the medieval romance, the miller's tale deliberately overturns those ideals. Chaucer places these two tales side by side to create one of the finest examples of literary contrasts. Please make a note of it. The miller, a coarse and outspoken commoner, narrates a fabliau. Fabliau is a comic story which is characterized by practical jokes or a clever trickery and earthy humor. So the plot concerns a person named John, an elderly carpenter who is married to the young and attractive Alison. Now, Nicholas is a clever university student lodging in John's house who falls in love with Alison. Together, they devise an elaborate scheme involving a false prophecy of another great flood to deceive John. Meanwhile, another admirer, Absalom, unsuccessfully attempts to court Alison. The story culminates in a series of comic misunderstandings involving kisses, branding irons, and public humiliations. So, beyond its humor and public humiliation, beyond its humor, the Miller's Tale reflects Chaucer's realism. And instead of idealized lovers and noble heroes, the characters are ordinary people driven by desire, jealousy, vanity, and foolishness. So the tale also parodies many features of courtly romance. Romantic language is applied to absurd situation, exposing the gap between literary idealism and everyday human behavior. Next is the Reeves tale. The Reeves tale follows naturally from the Miller's tale because it functions as an act of literary revenge. The Reeve himself, a carpenter by profession, feels insulted by the Miller's comic portrayal of a foolish carpenter and responds with an equally humorous story attacking a dishonest Miller. So the tales recounts how two Cambridge students discover that a miller has repeatedly cheated them by stealing grain, and determined to punish him, they spend the night at his house and cleverly outwit him through a series of comic deception. So, like the Miller's Tale, the story belongs to the Fabulous tradition and it celebrates intelligence, practical wit, and comic justice rather than moral idealism. So, the exchange between the Miller and the Reeve also demonstrate Chaucer's brilliant understanding of dramatic interaction. The pilgrims do not merely tell isolated stories, they respond to one another, creating lively conversations and rivalries throughout the pilgrimage. And this interconnection between tales gives the Canterbury Tales remarkable dramatic unity. Next, we'll discuss The Wife of Bath's Tale, which is one of the most celebrated narratives in the Canterbury Tales, as is her character. So it perfectly reflects the personality of its narrator. And before telling her story, the wife delivers a long prologue in which she defends her views on marriage, female authority, and personal experience, as we already discussed in the earlier video. The tale itself dramatizes those ideas through romance and symbolism. Now, the story is set during the legendary reign of King Arthur. A young knight commits a serious offense against a maiden and is sentenced to death. However, the queen and her ladies persuade Arthur to spare his life on one condition. Within a year and a day, he must discover what women must desire. So the knight travels widely but receives conflicting answers. And finally, he meets an old woman who promises the correct answer if he agrees to grant her any further or future requests. She tells him that women desire sovereignty, the right to govern their own lives and relationships. So the answer saves the knight, but the old woman then demands marriage as her reward. So though he was reluctant, the knight honors his promise because he's already made this promise. And on their wedding night, the old woman explains that true nobility comes from virtue rather than birth. And poverty can lead to spiritual richness, and age often brings wisdom. She finally offers the knight a choice. She can remain old but loyal, or become young and beautiful with the risk of infidelity. It's a classic situation, isn't it? The knight leaves the decision entirely to her. Also, the ones who are watching the video, please do comment what would you do. Okay, so because he grants her sovereignty, she transforms into a beautiful and faithful wife. The tale argues that successful marriage depends upon mutual respect, quality, and trust rather than domination. Although deeply rooted in medieval society, its discussion of gender relationship remains remarkably modern. And many critics regard The Wife of Bath as one of the earliest literary voices advocating female agency. So here Chaucer avoids simplistic conclusion. Instead, he presents a marriage as a relationship requiring negotiation, understanding, and shared authority. The Pardoner's Tale. So it is one of the finest examples of exemplum, which is a short moral story traditionally used by medieval preachers to illustrate ethical lessons. So it is an example of an exemplum. Kindly make a note. So, ironically, the pardoner himself openly admits that he preaches only to make money. His favorite biblical text is Radix malorum est cupiditas, the love of money is the root of all evil. And despite preaching against greed, he remains one of the greediest pilgrims. And the tale recounts the adventure of three drunken rioters who swear to kill death after learning that a friend had died. So, along the way, they encounter an old man who directs them to a tree when they discovered large quantity of gold instead of death. So, the treasure immediately destroys their friendship. Two conspirators plot to murder the third, while he secretly poisons the wine they will drink. Ultimately, all three die, fulfilling their quest to find death. The tale brilliantly demonstrates that greed destroys not only morality but also human relationships. And the partner's own hypocrisy strengthens rather than weakens the moral lesson. So, readers recognize the contradiction between the storyteller and his story, producing one of the greatest examples of dramatic irony in English literature. Now, the mysterious old man has generated considerable critical debate. Some scholars identify him as a symbol of death, while others interpret him as time, the science, or the wandering Jew. Chaucer deliberately leaves his identity ambiguous, increasing the tale's symbolic richness. So that brings us to the end of the Pardoner's Tale. And with that, we reach the end of our journey through the age of Chaucer, one of the most remarkable periods in history of English literature. Over the course of this series, we have explored the historical and social background of 14th century England, studied its major writers, understood the life and literary genius of Chaucer. I sincerely hope this complete series has strengthened not only your preparation for UGC NET, SET, or the MA English, or even university exams, but also your appreciation of one of literature's greatest storytellers. But history never stands still. As one age draws to a close, another begins. And in our next series, we will step into the age of transition, a fascinating period that bridges the medieval world and the Renaissance. We'll explore how England changed politically, socially, religiously, and culturally after Chaucer, and how those transformations laid the foundation for the brilliant flowering of English literature in the 16th century. So, thank you for being a part of this literary journey. And until we meet again in the age of transition, keep reading, keep thinking critically, and above all, keep your passion for literature alive. So, see you in the next series. Thank you.